Shalom and welcome to Simchat Yisrael. The year 2020 has been extraordinarily difficult for many Americans. As of the publishing of this video, over 230,000 Americans have lost their lives to COVID-19. It's hard to find someone whose life hasn't been affected by this terrible pandemic. Yeshua promises us, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Yet in the darkest moments, the promise of our Messiah seems impossibly remote. In the face of such profound loss, where can comfort be found? Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel down below. This week's Parsha, Chayei Sarah, asks the same question. The Parsha opens with the death of our mother Sarah and focuses on how the people she leaves behind deal with the loss. Abraham takes the passing of his beloved wife especially hard, and perhaps with good reason. There is a midrash that presents an alternate view of the events of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, immediately prior to the account of Sarah's death. While most Jewish commentators agree that the binding of Isaac was a test of Abraham's loyalty to God, Genesis Rabbah presents the Akedah as an attempt by Satan to trick Abraham into killing the son of the promise. Only God's intervention prevented the terrible tragedy that would have put an end to the Jewish people before they even began. The Midrash goes on to tell how Satan, furious at having been foiled, flies back to Sarah and asks her if she knows where her husband and her son are. When she professes that she does not know, Satan gleefully tells her that Abraham has absconded with her only son and murdered him on the mountain. Sarah is crushed by the betrayal of her husband and the death of her son, and dies of a broken heart. Abraham and Isaac return to find their world turned upside down. Rashi teaches that during all the years that Sarah was alive, there had been a blessing over Abraham's house. Candles lit before Shabbat burned from one Sabbath until the next. The dough she baked never spoiled, and a cloud always hovered over the tent to provide shade and rain. When she died, those blessings died with her. Sarah is gone, and there is a hole in the hearts of her family that seems impossible to fill. Abraham attempts to fill it by working to establish his legacy. With the companion of his past gone, Abraham looks forward towards the future. A man famous for wandering and never staying in one place finally buys property in Canaan, establishing a foothold for his descendants to settle in the land. Abraham, who once upon a time had the chutzpah to bargain with God for the lives of the Sodomites, now can no longer win a negotiation with a Hittite businessman and pays an inflated price for a plot of land to bury his wife. He then seeks to find a wife for his son, but rather than handle the marriage arrangements himself, he seems to feel like he's completely at the mercy of his servant. He practically begs the man not to marry Isaac to a Canaanite woman and pleads with him not to take his son away from the land. There is a deep sadness in all of Abraham's actions, as if he is throwing all his efforts into his son and his descendants because he feels his own story has ended. Half of his soul is gone, and it feels like nothing can make him whole again. While the Torah goes into great detail about Abraham's grieving process, less is said about his sons. In fact, we only get a single line in this Parsha describing Isaac's actions following his mother's death. In Genesis 24 we read, "Now Isaac had come from going to the well of Chayei, for he was living in the Negev. Isaac went out to meditate in the field towards evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming." This seems to be a throwaway line, easily discarded geographical information, and yet Rashi makes a startling comment on this verse. Coming from the well of Chayei, where he had gone to bring Hagar to Abraham his father, that he should marry her. Rashi makes the connection that the well that Isaac had visited was the same well that Hagar, the mother of his brother Ishmael, had fled to years ago when she was pregnant. In Genesis 16 it says, "Now the angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur." Even while his father was searching for a wife for Isaac, Isaac was searching for a wife for his father. Even though Abraham had given up on his own happiness, Isaac had not. Rather than becoming overwhelmed by his own grief, Isaac sought to heal his father's broken heart. He found his brother's mother, put back together the family that had been torn apart, and gave Abraham another chance at happiness. While Abraham's dealings during his time of mourning were with men, Isaac kept his eyes on God. And while he was praying in the fields that evening, the Lord rewarded his faithfulness. And then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her, and thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And Rashi makes one more astonishing comment, commenting on the verse, "to the tent of Sarah his mother. He brought her to the tent, and behold, she was Sarah his mother." When Rebekah enters Sarah's tent, the blessing that God had bestowed onto Sarah was given to her. The Shabbat candles that had gone out upon Sarah's death burst back to life and burned from Sabbath to Sabbath. The dough she baked never spoiled, and the cloud once again descended over Abraham's tent to provide shade and rain. Because Isaac kept his eyes on God, Sarah was restored to her family, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Chayei Sarah begins in tragedy, but ends in joy. And now perhaps we can have a greater understanding of Yeshua's words when he tells us that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The loss of those that we love creates a vacuum in our lives that seems impossible to fill. But if we put our trust in Yeshua, if we can turn our eyes towards him, even in the face of unbearable grief, he will fill the hole in our hearts. He will give us new beginnings and another chance at happiness. Shalom and thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe. And don't forget to visit simchatyisrael.org to learn more.